Shahnameh, the Book of Kings. Written by Hakim, Abul Qasim Ferdowsi Tusi. Translated by Helen Ziman. Transcribed and narrated by Lore Enchanter. Chapter 1. The Kings of Old. Kaiumers was the first ruler of Persia and held dominion over the entire world. He chose to reside in the mountains and dressed himself and his people in tiger skins. Under his reign, the concepts of nurturing and clothing were introduced, which were previously unknown. Individuals and animals from all corners of the globe came to pay homage to him and receive his laws. His glory was comparable to the brilliance of the sun. However, Ahriman the evil became envious of the Shah's increasing honor and desired to seize control of the world. To achieve this, he instructed his powerful son, a Dev, to assemble an army and wage war against Kaiumers and his beloved son Saiamuk, with the intention of annihilating them completely. Now, when Serosch, the angel who protects humans from the traps of the Devs, and who flies 7 times around the earth each night to guard over the children of Ahura Mazda, heard about this, he appeared like a peri and cautioned Kaiumers. Thus, when Saiamuk led his warriors to confront Ahriman's army, he was aware that he was battling a Dev, and he exerted all his power. However, the Dev proved to be stronger than him, and defeated him, crushing him with his hands. When Kaiumers heard about the mourning, he was deeply saddened. He wept continuously for a year, and his army also wept with him. Even the wild animals and birds in the sky joined in the lamentation. Sorrow filled the land, and the entire world was enveloped in darkness until Serosch commanded the Shah to raise his head and contemplate revenge. And Kaiumers obeyed and commanded Husheng, the son of Saiamuk,
"Take the lead of the army and march against the Devs."
And the king, by reason of his great age, went in the rear. Now there were in the host Paris, also tigers, lions, wolves, and other fierce creatures, and when the black Dev heard their roaring he trembled for very fear. Neither could he hold himself against them, and Husheng routed him utterly. Then when Kaiumers saw that his well-beloved son was revenged he laid him down to die, and the world was void of him, and Husheng reigned in his stead. Now Husheng was a wise and just man, and he ruled over his kingdom for 40 years. During his reign, he brought justice to the land and made the world a better place. He was the first to give fire to mankind, showing them how to extract it from stones. He also taught them how to control rivers, using them to irrigate the land and make it fertile. He encouraged them to cultivate crops and harvest them. Additionally, he categorized and named the animals. When Husheng passed away, he left behind a void in the world, devoid of his powerful throne. However, his son Tamorith proved to be a worthy successor. He continued to enlighten the people, teaching them the art of spinning and weaving. He ruled over the land with strength and longevity. Yet, the Devs, filled with envy, plotted to destroy him. Despite their malicious intentions, Tamorith defeated them and banished them to the earth. Some of the Devs, seeking mercy, approached Tamorith and promised to share their knowledge in exchange for their lives. Tamorith, willing to listen, agreed to their proposition. They taught him the skill of writing, and thus, a gift was bestowed upon humanity through the unlikely source of the evil Devs. However, when Tamorith had sat upon the golden throne for 30 years, he passed away, but his works endured. Jamshid, his glorious son, who was filled with his father's wisdom, succeeded him. Jamshid ruled over the land for 700 years, surrounded by power, and was obeyed by Deves, birds, and Paris. The world was happier because of him, and he too was joyful. Death was unknown among men, and they did not experience pain or sorrow. He divided men into different classes: priests, warriors, artificers, and husbandmen. He also divided the year into periods. With the help of the Deves, he constructed magnificent structures, and Persepolis was built by him. It is still known as Takht-i-Jamshid, meaning the throne of Jamshid. After accomplishing these feats, people from all corners of the earth gathered around his throne to pay homage and present gifts before him. And Jamshid organized a grand feast and instructed everyone to celebrate it, naming it Nowruz, which means the new day. The people of Persia continue to observe this tradition even today. Jamshid's influence grew stronger, bringing peace to the world, and he was regarded as nothing but a benevolent ruler. Then, a situation arose where Jamshid's heart was filled with pride, causing him to forget the origin of his prosperity and the source of his blessings. He only saw himself as the supreme being on earth and declared himself as God, commanding his image to be worshipped. However, upon hearing this, the Mubids, who were astrologers and wise men, felt deep sorrow and were unsure how to respond to the Shah. Consequently, God withdrew his support from Jamshid, leading the kings and nobles to rebel against him. They withdrew their warriors from his court, allowing Ahriman to gain control over the land. Now, in the deserts of Arabia, there lived a king named Murtas. He was known for his generosity and fairness. King Murtas had a beloved son named Zohak. One day, a being named Ahriman came to the palace, disguised as a nobleman. Ahriman had a wicked plan to tempt Zohak and lead him astray from the righteous path. And he spoke to him and said,
"If you will listen to me and enter into a covenant, I will raise your head above the sun."
Now the young man was innocent and pure of heart, and he swore to the Dev that he would obey him in all things. Then Ahriman commanded him to kill his father.
"For this old man,"
he said,
"is a burden on the earth, and as long as he lives, you will remain unknown."
When Zohak heard this, he was filled with sorrow and wanted to break his oath. But Ahriman did not allow him and made him set a trap for Murtas. And Zohak and the evil Ahriman kept silent, and Murtas fell into the snare and was killed. Then Zohak placed the crown of Thases on his head, and Ahriman taught him the arts of magic. And he ruled over his people in both good and evil, for he had not yet completely succumbed to deceit. Then Ahriman conceived an idea in his evil heart. He transformed himself into a young man and desired to serve the king as a cook. Zohak, unaware of his true identity, welcomed him and granted his request, entrusting him with the keys to the kitchen. Until then, people had been nourished with herbs, but Ahriman began preparing meat for Zohak. He presented new and delicious dishes to the king, who greatly enjoyed his flavorful meats. The consumption of meat gave the king courage and strength comparable to that of a lion. Impressed, he summoned his cook to appear before him and asked him to make a request. And the cook said,
"If the king takes pleasure in his servant, grant that he may kiss his shoulders."
Now Zohak, who feared no evil, granted the request, and Ahriman kissed him on his shoulders. And when he had done so, the ground opened beneath his feet and covered the cook, so that all men present were amazed thereat. But from his kiss sprang hissing serpents, venomous and black, and the king was afraid, and desired that they should be cut off from the root. But as often as the snakes were cut down did they grow again, and in vain the wise men and physicians searched for a remedy. Then Ahriman came once again disguised as a learned man, and was led before Zohak, and he spoke, saying,
"This ill cannot be healed, neither can the serpents be uprooted. Prepare food for them, therefore, that they may be fed, and give unto them for nourishment the brains of men, for perhaps this may destroy them."
But in his secret heart, Ahriman desired that the world might thus be made desolate, and daily were the serpents fed, and the fear of the king was great in the land. The world withered in his thrall, the customs of good men were forgotten, and the desires of the wicked were accomplished. Now, news had spread throughout Iran that there was a mighty and fearsome ruler in the land of Thasis. The kings and nobles who had abandoned Jamshid because he had rebelled against God turned to Zohak and pleaded with him to become their ruler. They declared him Shah. The armies of Arabia and Persia marched against Jamshid, and he fled in fear. For 50 years, no one knew where he had gone, as he hid from the wrath of the Serpent King. However, eventually, he could no longer escape the rage of Zohak. Zohak's servants found Jamshid as he wandered along the Cathay seashore. They sawed him in half and sent the news to their master. And so, the throne and power of Jamshid perished, much like withering grass, because he had become arrogant and sought to elevate himself above his creator. So Ahriman's beloved, Zohak the serpent, sat on the throne of Iran, the kingdom of light. He continued to commit one evil act after another until it reached a point where it overflowed, and the entire land cried out against him. However, Zohak and his advisors, the Deves, ignored this outcry, and he ruled as the Shah for 1,000 years. During this time, vice thrived openly while virtue remained hidden. Despair consumed everyone's hearts, as it seemed that mankind would perish in order to satisfy the insatiable appetite of these evil creatures. Every day, 2 men were sacrificed to fulfill their desires, and Zohak showed no mercy to anyone. The land was engulfed in darkness due to his wickedness. But Ahura Mazda noticed it and felt sympathy for his people, and he announced that they should no longer endure the consequences of Jamshid's sin. And he ensured that a grandson was born to Jamshid, and his parents named him Feridoun. Now it happened that when he was born, Zohak had a dream. He saw a slender youth, resembling a cypress tree, approaching him with a cow-headed mace. The youth struck Zohak to the ground. Upon waking, the tyrant was filled with fear and called for his Mubids to interpret the dream. The Mubids were troubled, as they sensed danger. However, Zohak threatened them if they were to predict any harm. For 3 days, they remained silent out of fear. But on the 4th day, one of them, who was brave enough, spoke up and said, "There will come a man named Feridoun, who will inherit your throne and reverse your fortunes. He will strike you down with a cow-headed mace." Upon hearing these words, Zohak fainted, and the Mubids fled from his anger. Once he regained consciousness, Zohak ordered a search for Feridoun throughout the world. From that moment on, Zohak was consumed by bitterness and experienced neither rest nor joy. Now, it happened that Feridoun's mother was afraid that the Shah would harm her child if he discovered that he was descended from Jamshid's lineage. So, she concealed him in the dense forest where the extraordinary Kaiumers resided. whose hair was as beautiful as a peacock's feathers. She beseeched the guardian of Pourmier to protect her son, and for 3 years, he was raised in the woods, with Pourmier as his caretaker. However, when the appointed time came, the mother learned that news of Pourmier had reached Zohak's ears, and she feared that he would find her son. Therefore, she took him to a distant land in India, to a devout hermit who lived on Mount Alborz. She implored the hermit to safeguard her son, who was destined for great accomplishments. The hermit granted her request. Meanwhile, Zohak had discovered the beautiful Pourmier and learned about Feridoun. When he heard that the boy had fled, he became as furious as a raging elephant. He killed the extraordinary cow and all the living creatures in the vicinity, turning the forest into a barren wasteland. He continued his search, but he could neither find any information nor catch a glimpse of Feridoun, and his heart was consumed by sorrow. In this year, Zohak decided to strengthen his army and asked his people to confirm that he had always been a fair and honorable king to them. Out of fear, they complied. However, while they were taking their oath, a voice outside the Shah's palace cried out for justice. Zohak ordered for the person to be brought in, and the man stood before the gathering of nobles. Then Zohak opened his mouth and said,
I charge thee give a name unto him who hath done thee wrong.
And the man, when he saw it was the Shah who questioned him, smote his head with his hands. But he answered and said,
I am Kaweh, a blacksmith and a blameless man, and I sue for justice, and it is against thee, O king, that I cry out. 17 fair sons have I called mine, yet only one remaineth to me, for that his brethren were slain to still the hunger of thy serpents, and now they have taken from me this last child also. I pray thee spare him unto me, nor heap thy cruelties upon the land past bearing.
And the Shah feared Kaweh's wrath, beholding that it was great, and he granted him the life of his son and sought to win him with soft words. Then he prayed him that he would also sign the testimony that Zohak was a just and noble king. But Kaweh cried out,
No, you wicked and dishonorable man, ally of thieves, I will not participate in this lie.
And he grabbed the declaration and tore it into pieces, scattering them into the air. After doing so, he walked out of the palace, leaving all the nobles and people astonished, unable to stop him. Kaweh then went to the marketplace and shared with the people everything he had witnessed, reminding them of Zohak's evil deeds and the injustices they had suffered under his rule. He encouraged them to break free from the control of Ahriman. Removing the leather apron that blacksmiths used to protect their knees when striking with a hammer, he raised it high on the tip of a lance and declared,
Let this be our banner as we march forth and seek out Feridoun, asking him to save us from the clutches of the Serpent King.
The people erupted in joyous cheers and gathered around Kaweh, following him out of the city while he proudly carried his standard. They continued marching for many days until they reached Feridoun's palace. Now, these events occurred in the land of Iran after 16 years had passed since Feridoun's birth. When that time had elapsed, he came down from Mount Alborz and went to his mother, asking her about his ancestry. She informed him that he was descended from the lineage of Jamshid, as well as Zohak and his wicked actions. Then Feridoun said,
I will uproot this monster from the earth, and his palace I will raze to the dust.
But his mother spoke and said,
Not so, my son. Do not let your youthful anger betray you, for how can you stand against the whole world?
Yet she did not long hinder him from his hard task. For soon a mighty crowd approached the palace led by someone who carried an apron uplifted on a lance. Then Feridoun knew that help had come to him. And after listening to Kaweh, he went to his mother wearing the helmet of kings on his head, and he said to her,
Mother, I am going to war, and it is up to you to pray to God for my safety.
Then he had a mighty club made for him, and he traced its pattern on the ground, with the top shaped like a cow's head, in memory of poor Maye, his nurse. Then he adorned the standard of Kaweh with luxurious brocades from Raum, and adorned it with jewels. And when everything was prepared, they began their journey towards the west to find Zohak, for they were unaware that he had gone to India in search of Feridoun. When they arrived in Baghdad, which is located on the banks of the Tigris, they stopped and Feridoun asked the guardians of the river to transport them across. However, the guardians refused, stating that only those with the royal seal were allowed to pass. Upon hearing this, Feridoun became angry and paid no attention to the fast-flowing river or the hidden dangers within its waters. He prepared himself and his horse and plunged into the water, with the entire army following him. They struggled greatly against the strong current, and it seemed as if the waves would overpower them. But their courageous horses overcame all obstacles, and they safely reached the shore. They then turned towards the city now known as Jerusalem, as it was here that Zohak had constructed his magnificent palace. And when they had entered the city, all the people gathered around Feridoun, for they despised Zohak and relied on Feridoun to save them. And he killed the thieves that occupied the palace and removed the cursed talisman that was engraved on the walls. Then he ascended the idolater's throne and placed the crown of Iran on his head. And all the people knelt before him and referred to him as Shah. Now, when Zohak returned from his search for Feridoun and discovered that he was sitting on his throne, he surrounded the city with his army. However, Feridoun's army marched against him, and the people's wishes were with them. Throughout the day, bricks fell from the walls and stones from the terraces, and arrows and spears rained down like hail from a dark cloud, until Feridoun had defeated Zohak's power. Then Feridoun raised his mace with a cow's head to kill the Serpent King. However, the blessed Serosch descended and exclaimed, "Not so! Do not strike, for Zohak's time has not yet come." The Serosch instructed the Shah to capture the usurper and take him far away from human habitation, where he should be bound to a rock. Feridoun obeyed and led Zohak to Mount Demond. He secured him to the rock using powerful chains and nails driven into his hands, leaving him to suffer in agony. The scorching sun beamed down on the desolate cliffs, devoid of any trees or shrubs to provide shelter. The chains pierced his flesh, and he was tormented by thirst. Eventually, the earth was relieved of Zohak, the malevolent one, and Feridoun ascended to the throne in his place.